Welcome to the Underground QA podcast, everyone. I am your host, Ariel Smith. Our podcast is a podcast about quality assurance in the video game industry. I'll be your host for today, and my pronouns are she, her. We have three fellow game dev professionals joining us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I'm a QA Solutions Manager at Keywords. My pronouns are he, him.
Hello all, my name is David. I'm a QA lead at Obsidian Entertainment, and my pronouns are also he, him.
And hi, I'm Marcin, and my pronouns are he, him.
And I forgot to mention, I'm also a test manager at Bungie. So, quick disclaimer, all individuals appearing on the podcast are not doing so as official representatives of their respective companies, employers, clients, customers, or any other third parties, and the opinions here expressed are their own. Nothing in the podcast is intended to be tax, legal, financial, or employment advice. The production is presented for information and entertainment purposes only. For professional advice, seek out a professional. So today, we're going to do a follow-up on our previous episode about XDev testing companies. Last time we talked about working with XDev companies, but this time we're flipping it around and we're focusing on the XDev testers themselves. We're going to talk about how to be the most effective XDev tester, how to progress in your career as an XDev tester, and if we have time, we'll go over some of our advice for XDev test leads. So let's dive in. First topic, how to be the most effective XDev tester. Adam, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So to become like an expert tester, you got to be engaged. You have to want to learn about the product. You have to, get involved with the game, get involved with your testers, your leads, ask a lot of questions, so that you can become like the SME or the expert for the game or for the testing methodology that you're attempting to become an expert from. Don't just sit back and be passive, expect, someone to jump out at you and give you those challenges that you're seeking. Speak up, be in part of meetings, have strong suggestions, talk to your leads, talk to your seniors about them. Those types of communication are going to have you be called out more because they're looking to you as, wow, this person, wants to move up, wants to engage. They're going to keep coming to you when you come back with really good feedback. So speak up, be loud, to talk to the people around your team.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. Like in my experience working with XDev testers, the ones who seemed to be the most effective were often the ones who also seemed to be the most engaged, in part because just by virtue of like asking lots of questions, they were the most likely to be like doing the thing that I wanted them to be doing, or they, were the most likely to be the person doing it correctly, or they would have the right knowledge about the game because they were asking lots of questions about the game. I found that those folks who took the time to really like get invested in what they were doing, it made a notable difference in how effective they were.
How do you, as a tester on such a team, how do you overcome? Because sometimes there will be projects where kind of the team is fenced off from any direct communication with developers, and usually it's done either from either a lead or some group of testers on the project. So what would be your advice to go through it and despite that try to be as proactive as possible?
It's a great question. So some projects are different than others. As you mentioned, sometimes we have direct communication with our developer partners, our publisher partners, and what we're trying to do. And sometimes we're kind of siloed a bit. So we only might have communication with one point of contact, and it isn't as open and awesome as we would really like it to be. But I mean, the real advice still is be open, ask questions, want to know more. If you're working on the most siloed project where you only have one point of contact and it's a QA lead or a QAM at a studio, and you're still trying to do more, do what you can, at your office with your staff, learn as much as you can about the game. If you're looking to give feedback, make sure you're doing it in a very concise manner. Make sure you're doing it through the proper channels. And what I mean by that is, if you're working with a dev who only wants comms from one person, then make sure you're feeding that person everything that you have. Don't try to go around them. Don't try to create noise where they're not looking for it. but also make sure that any message that you're trying to convey about the game, about systems, about things that are wrong that maybe just aren't bugs or feedback, make sure you're bringing that up to your lead. Make sure you're emailing, talking about it in meetings, find any opportunity to be able to do that if you're passionate about it. Now, your lead might come back and say, hey, thanks, I appreciate it. They may not be looking for this, or hey, this is really good. Can you summarize this up a little bit? You may not be getting the feedback that you want, because as a tester, everybody thinks that their stuff is better than everybody else's, because of course I found it, I'm talking about it, I want this feedback. You also need to be good about receiving feedback, because sometimes you're going to hear something that you don't like, or something that isn't what you expected, and you kind of have to roll with the punches. Don't let that stop you, but don't think that just because you found it, oh my God, they're not acting on it, they don't care, flip a desk and walk away. You got to be professional about it as well.
So this actually touches on a topic that you and I were talking about, Adam, which we called the box, which is just like the box of like the boundaries within which a XDev team is allowed and expected to operate. It can vary like from project to project. Like some teams, like you said, really want you to be like highly engaged and directly communicating, and other teams, project may say like only talk to this specific person and send all of your questions that way. I am curious to know, like from your perspective, like what is the best thing that an XDev tester to do to like excel within like the constraints that they're given like within the box. Like let's say like they're on a project where there's only one person they're allowed to talk to on the development team. How do they like stand out and make themselves like clearly one of the best folks on the team?
Some of the best feedback that I've gotten from partners that we've worked with is when I have a developer, an engineer, send me an email and saying, hey, just want to send you an email that we have a tester who goes above and beyond, who makes use of my time and their time appropriately. They send very concise, detailed emails, but are also to the point. They don't ramble. They give proper action items about the things that they're working on, and really good, thoughtful, and just thoughtful suggestions about ways to go about a certain thing or whatnot. And when I get those kind of emails, or my team get those, it's very good, because that the tester is going above and beyond. They really don't have to do that. They don't have to go down that path. And I can just say that the best thing a tester can do is do things like that get that feedback from devs and from publisher partners. Their time is valuable, so is ours. But any feedback that we're able to provide in a concise manner that is professional, that can help them do their job, but also get through the passion that the tester or that test team might have, is going to be taken well at the publisher level. But again, Ariel, to your point in regards to like the box, there are some partners we work with that do not want that level of communication. They're basically just giving us a job to do because they're in crunch. They need to get something out the door, and they're only using XDev for this one task. And we need to make sure that even though we may have testers who are passionate about a certain thing, that we're going through the right channels. Again, going back to our test lead on our side, our test manager, to get any feedback over. But when we have opportunities to work directly with devs, there's magic can happen there. And we have testers that start to feel what it's like to work directly with dev. And then they get more excited about the work that they're able to do to change the course of a title or a feature or something. And that's where I think good QA starts to happen. That's where the eyes start to brighten up on the tester side, that their feedback is important.
Yeah, what are your strats for testers and for a team in general when you don't have the same visibility as developers, right? So sometimes your feedback, balance and changes or whatever it is, the dev team, as you said, might not have the time to incorporate, or sometimes you're gonna just hit the wall constantly because you don't have the visibility. You don't know what they can do or what they have time or money for or don't. So how can you handle, not to burn out yourself by trying again and then being constantly blocked because you don't have the visibility, right?
No, it's a really good point. Um, I think the term of the box is basically just a set on our side is just a set of expectations about what this team is meant to be and what they're supposed to do. You can be working on a project that has that ultimate communication back and forth, our testers directly with their counterparts on the other side. That's the dream. I mean, that's where good things happen. You have a strong team, you have strong communication, everything's great. But there is a flip side to that, and that is it's the models, like I mentioned before, where we're working, but we don't have that level of comms. We have to set expectations with our staff because, I mean, for example, if I was working on, the best project in the world that had that ultimate comms and everything was great, and oh my God, when this game shipped, I was so passionate and happy about it that it went out there because I made a difference. And then when that project shipped, I went on to a different project that didn't have that level of comms. As a tester, that can be draining. It's like a shot in the heart. It's like, oh my God, what do I do? That's where the test management, the test leads and senior testers really need to make sure their team's expectations are set properly, but also find a way to get that passion over to our staff, from our staff to the clients. We had a partner that we worked with, and we had an amazing test lead and test team. And what they would do is at the end of every week or the end of every 2 weeks, I'm not quite sure the cadence, they would sit down at the end of the day for 30, 45 minutes and say, hey, what's important about this build, this branch cut, this sprint? What are some features that you would like to push back to dev? What are some things that you don't like that you haven't been able to tell your counterpart because of reasons? And let's work on building an email that we can get directly to the staff over there to let them know that, hey, these are some features, these are some issues, these are some things that we think need to get a little bit more polish, et cetera, whatever. And it's done in a professional manner through the right channels. And some of those things might get picked up. Now, thing is, some of them might not, because at the end of the day, they're wanting us to do X. We're trying to add a little bit additional value, and they may not take it. And our expectations need to be set on our side so that, when they don't take that feedback, oh my God, they're not listening to us. I don't want to work on this project anymore. We're humans. We all like to be heard, and sometimes we don't. So it's a little upsetting, but we just have to ensure that we're still being professional QA testers and leaders and doing everything we can to keep morale up in those types of situations.
I know we'll talk a little bit about leads later, but in the context of the box, is there anything you recommend when first setting up a project to better define what those boundaries are? And I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, that you're trying to push that a little bit over time too, as you grow that relationship with the client and find out, hey, how can we better communicate? How can we grow this relationship over time? Is that accurate? And if so, how do you approach that?
David, I think your comment's pretty accurate. So whenever a project starts, it's the test manager, project manager, test lead's responsibility to try to set up communication pathways and expectations with the staff about what type of engagement this is going to be. So all of those things need to get laid out. Like you actually have a very strong term for it here, like building up the box. We don't use a term like that. Maybe we should. I'll patent pending. If we use it, we'll send you a nickel. So when we build something like that internally, we want to make sure that our testers aren't overstepping the bounds, our teams aren't overstepping the bounds, but just basically giving our our testers the sandbox to be able to be the best testers they possibly can. We have seen evidence where we may start off as this black box group of folks that are working in the background that nobody cares about, that's in the closet in the back room, and over time that trust is developed. Because just a slight segue here, there are some developers and publishers who've never worked with external development before, or they may be asked to use external development and they're not used to it, or the company is, but the folks at that studio don't know external development that well, and they may not know what to expect, and they're like, oh, I'm just throwing it over the fence, I don't care as long as I get my bugs at the end of the day. That's a reality, and it sucks, but it is. I would expect that if we have that closed type of communication, if any external development job is doing a really good job, then you would hope that those relationships would warm up. You're gonna level up that paragon a bit with that group, so that hey, Bobby and Sally gave really good feedback on that last session, and I wasn't expecting that. Can we hear more about that? Should we set up a meeting at the end of the week to talk about other great ideas that your team might have. Because if we don't do that, they don't know. And if they don't know, your expectations are quite low. Any external development team should be working on finding ways to increase those expectations on the developer side. Because then, work can be just that much better for you.
Do you have any recommendations for the amount of constraints of the box? Because from my personal experience, which probably is a little bit torturous, which sorry to every external team that works with me, I put so many constraints to be like the most simplistic jobs, just to force the teams to get bored a little bit out of the task. So then they are kind of forced to get creative, and they build up that pressure of trying to be creative, finding their own way to find because they get accustomed with the product and with the game and whatnot, and because the idea of I'm bored to death with those smokes and just speedruns all the time. I want to do something creative and something fun, and I start hearing from the lead those ideas pop up, and then when I start loosening the constraints of the box and making the box bigger, because it comes like naturally from the team, and then we can find a way, instead of me from the beginning putting a very big box, because then I tend from experience see that the focus is not there, like it's all over the place because they're learning the new product, so they don't know where to best focus. But if I start small and start expanding over time, I get much better results than otherwise.
I'm still laughing at the fact that you just want your teams to suffer a little bit.
Forced boredom. That's our new term.
Listen,
I want you to be bored.
Yeah, when our teams walk the floor and they say, "Hey, I'm really bored," I'm going to find out who their project manager is, and I'm going to say, "Oh, it must be Marcin."
It must be Marcin, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we hear you. We're gonna put your face on the board. We're gonna throw darts at it. So I think that's a valid action. I've worked on, as a tester, titles that I did not like, that were extremely boring, and I didn't want any a part of. But it was my project that week, or it was my project that month, and I find as testers, sometimes what's the term? Idle hands are the devil's playground. When you're working on a title and you're extremely bored and you're running smoke checks, or you're running that same test pass that you ran last week, that you ran the week before, a good tester is going to start thinking of ways. Well, how can I do this test differently? Okay. There are games where people do passive runs, like being able to get from checkpoint A to checkpoint Z without killing anyone, or without using the gun if you're playing a shooter or whatever. If you can find really creative ways to do things like that, I think that's valid testing. And then you can say, hey, I tried to do a passive run without doing this thing, and I was still able to do it. Is that as designed? That's putting a creative mind at work. While I appreciate the push towards a creative mind, making the testers have more pain, that's an option as long as it works. Yeah, we need to challenge our staff to not just do the checklist. I hated smoke checks. I don't know anyone who loves them. And they were probably the worst part of my day. But at some point, testers can find creative ways to do those things. And sometimes, it delivers results. It'll deliver different avenues and ways to be able to test a game they might not have thought of before.
I think part of the reason why smoke tests are so unfun to do is because, for one thing, they're repetitive, but also because they often don't produce bugs. There's lots of activities that can produce a lot of bugs. Smoke tests are not one of them. They will tell you whether or not the build is broken or not, but they're probably not going to give you that kind of rush of finding some unique or novel, interesting exploit or something like that, right? That usually comes from more unscripted testing. I was actually curious. So given the constraints that many teams are under, where you're kind of being prescribed certain tasks, you're being limited in your maybe some of the communication that you can do with the development team, how can a tester show initiative in an environment like that? Do you have any examples that you can think of where people have actually managed to
Absolutely.
find a way to like stand out and do something different?
So I'll speak from experience. I'm going to date myself here, so I apologize. Back in 2006, when I was a tester, like tester at the very bottom, entry level tester in QA, um, I enjoyed what I did. I hated the smoke test. I was working on a game that I didn't like, and I wasn't good at it. It was a racing type of title, not my jam, not very good at it. So I would start just looking in the database at all of the other issues and stuff that were there, that were open, that were in regression, and I would just try to understand. Okay, well, if there was a lot of bugs in this particular area of the game, maybe there's more there to find. So that started teaching me about Halo testing. I didn't know what it was when I was doing it, but I found out afterwards that this is actually a very significant feature. Again, this is back in the day before real heat maps were a thing. You start to realize where the defects are, and if there's one problem there, there's probably 10 more. The other thing that I did as a tester is I started seeing issues in the database that had tags on them, and I had no idea what they were. The terms lot check, TRC, and TCR at the time. And I was always wondering, like, well, how come the bug that I wrote got taken out of the database and rewritten as TCR 15? Like, I was doing something else, but someone took it and rewrote it. That was my issue. And they told us that, well, the issue that you wrote was actually a certification failure, TCR 15, sign-in changes. So it needed to get tagged appropriately. And then I asked questions like, well, why wasn't I told how to do that? I could have done that. I could have found that. And that started an interest for me to learn about certification. And then I would start asking my test lead and my test manager, hey, can I get the docs on what the test cases are for those different certification checks, so that I can kind of know what the hell I'm doing. If I'm finding these things, I want to tag them appropriately. And then that's when you get sat down and said, oh, no, only certified people can do these types of things who really know what they are. Yeah. And I was like, okay, great. Awesome. How do I become one of those? So yeah. I think, digging into the database, seeing what's there. If you feel bored on the thing that you're doing, there's always ways on a project that you're working on to provide extra value. You just might have to do a little bit of digging to be able to get there. And that was an example that I used when I was a tester for, digging in from kind of the space that I was in.
That echoes some of my own experiences when I was like a tester at a publishing company. We were kind of like an ex-dev team where the development team was like throwing stuff over the wall at us. And I was writing up tons of bugs that just never got fixed. They would just sit there in the database, and it sent a message to me that the development team didn't really care about those bugs. They were mostly like low priority, like localization issues, or maybe they were just going to get to them later. But every time I sent them an exploit, like, hey, if you stand right here and use this particular ability on this boss, then you can defeat them without ever being hurt. They would fix that almost immediately. They jumped all over that. And because we were doing a lot of exploratory testing, we had a lot of free time to go chase the bugs that we wanted to chase. So I used that time to just hunt for exploits and boss fights. I would do really weird combinations of skills. I would try and find that one spot in the arena where I could stand, where they would just never hurt me. And I found tons of exploits that got fixed. And then the game released, and the players obviously found a bunch more, but there were at least fewer of them because I had done that. And that had felt like a way for me to kind of take the reins a little bit and steer myself. But, obviously you also have to be given the room to do that. Like if you're only ever assigned test passes to do, you're never going to have the opportunity to do that kind of like unscripted testing. So that's another little nugget of info for the developers out there that are directing XDev folks. Give them some unscripted exploratory testing time so they can surprise you with the bugs they find.
That's a really good point. Ad hoc testing is important, although some people we hear from, they think, oh, that's just free testing, you're not doing anything. But what you're describing is a reason why it's valuable.
Adam, say it again. Say ad hoc again, please.
Ad hoc.
Well, I love when people use ad hoc and exploratory as different, not the same. It's like when I hear exploratory and it's ad hoc, I hate it so much. So I love it, Adam.
I mean, I think that that exploratory testing can be a giant waste of time if it's not used properly. But if you have an engaged team that's talented and knows like what the priorities are and knows how to chase those priorities, then exploratory testing can be your most effective tool in your quiver for actually getting bugs. But yeah, I will see the point that like if you give folks exploratory testing with very little direction, communication, sense of what the priorities should be, then it might just turn into like free time that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, and that should never be the case. You're absolutely right, though.
Yeah.
I have a question to you guys because so Adam is not felt alone with being an old person. When I was a young ex-dev sprout, I've been on projects where it's like a Facebook game or whatever it is. You have like 2 weeks, 2 maps for 2 weeks, and that's only you're playing because it's the same experience as for the players. It's been for a long time, so there's nothing to find. It's the most grueling, boring, constrained project you can ever be. So, what would be your guys' advice for worst case? Because we can be on a good project with good lead, with good management, with good devs, everything. What is your advice to keep your morale high, to keep your proactivity and being, that guy that wants to stand out and develop when you are in the worst project and you have all the constraints in the world and you're working on a project that it's boring as hell?
So I have a lot of stories here. I don't think we have enough time on this episode to be able to talk about them, but and I do not recommend that a lot of people do this, but this is something that I did personally. I worked on a project that I absolutely hated. I think everyone that was on that project absolutely hated it. It was a Wii game. It was an IP and franchise that no one really cared about. We definitely weren't specialists about it. But personally, when I was a tester working on it, it was like, what's the term that people use when they watch stuff on Netflix that they know is horrible? It's like hate watching. Well, I would hate test. I would hate test a game. And it was, to me, I'm going to put as many bugs that are valid bugs in the system as possible. I'm going to be the bug leader on my team for this title. I'm going to make sure that this is the most well QA'd, horrible gaming experience for the testers that are going to be playing it. But I'm going to be passionate about the fact that I found everything. Even though I hate this IP, I hate everything about it. I'm only here for 2 weeks. I'm going to get moved on to something else, but I'm going to be remembered. And when you search that database, you're going to see that my name was up top. And it was like a bit of a challenge amongst the testers as well, because you're sitting next to people and you're like, okay, let's, today we're going to find 10 or 12 A issues in this game. We're going to exploit the hell out of it. That's our mission for the day. Because maybe we weren't given a lot of, instruction from the team. Maybe we had test passes and stuff that we had to do, but we had to find ways to motivate ourselves. And you're going to have rocky roads like that in QA where you work on a title that you absolutely do not like. And if you don't have a ton of tasks and instructions and you're bored and you hate it, you got to find a way to get through. So that was what I did. Don't recommend that to everybody, but it was what worked for me.
I mean, I think that there's something about what you're saying in the idea of turning what you're doing into a game and gamifying it, and not playing the game that you're testing, but playing a different game, which is how many bugs can I write, Like I've definitely done that. I've had, peers and I who, when we were testing, we would like get into a competition over who was going to write the most number of bugs that day. And we would even start putting our own constraints on it. Like, well, they can't be like Pry 3 geo bugs. Like it has to be like Pry 2 and above. Whoever writes the most Pry 2
exactly.
above, they get, someone else will buy them hot dogs or something like that. Like we would have all sorts of stuff. But those kinds of games are fun and can be more fun than the game you're actually testing.
Yeah, it can be. It creates a little bit more camaraderie and no Z fighting issues. Yeah, like you can't write those because then that's cheating. You destroy the database at that point. Yes, way too easy.
Yeah, I enjoy playing the efficiency game because we talked about like if you get your testers really bored, they'll go get creative on how to test other stuff. But I find myself taking it the other way. It's like, okay, I have to go verify this item appears in the shop, and I have 600 items that I got to do over the next week. It becomes the efficiency game of like, okay, how can I make this 2 clicks easier for myself to get through this? How can I like organize the test plan a little bit better, organize the game a little bit better, Can I like do all of the ones on this day at the same time? So like I get into a kind of an efficiency game of how many test cases can I accurately get through? Don't skip stuff, don't skimp out on things, but like what if there's like little tiny efficiency gains? Because if you have to do it hundreds of times, it starts to add up. I had two other examples.
Every time we talk about this, I always remember the time I had to create like 1,000 Xbox accounts for testing purposes, and me and my team like split it up and see how fast we could get through it. But it was just like the most monotonous thing to have to just create an account over and over and over and over again.
It's even worse if you had to do it back on the original blue screen debug menu of like the Xbox 360 kit, where you had to go back to that original blue screen to type everything there just to create the PartnerNet account. Even worse, 100%. Yeah. Worst job ever.
Let's move on to our next topic. So we were going to talk about career progression for XDev testers. And since we had been talking about the box, let's start there. How can a tester's career progression be impacted by the constraints that are placed on them by like a development team? Like, does that hinder their ability to develop certain skills or things like that? Like, does it impact their ability to stand out at all?
So I think the real answer here is yes. I mean, anything that you do inside can affect some testers in certain ways. For example, if we're working with a partner that has very strong communication blockers on what we can do, we're potentially hindering some of our testers' growth, because they may have worked on an amazing project prior where they were I would consider probably the best staff member on that project. But now they've been put on something because that other title is shipped, and this is the next project that's in. Then it could potentially hurt them, because they like when you get the taste of something that is just pinnacle, like S tier, and then you move down to C tier. It's like, man, what did I do wrong? Like, did I not do a good job? Why am I being put on this project? My growth is being stifled because I can't do the amazing thing that I did on the last project. So, I mean, the reality is yes. But I would also say that good motivated staff will find ways to get around that. And also good leadership on any XDev group that is working with those folks will find ways to challenge that staff to continue being the best they possibly can, so that they don't get bored, they don't get upset, they don't get aggravated because they're working on something else that's different. If you're working on a AAA MOBA where your feedback is amazing and you're being put on a 2D Facebook game and you're like, well, this isn't really what I wanted, or this isn't what's going to move me ahead, that's where the managers and the leads really need to get involved to ensure that the morale is staying for that team and those individuals who are looking to move up.
How do you even start a conversation as a tester with in an XDev company? Like, how do you? I'm not asking specific for keywords, but in general, how would you approach? Because from my limited experience of briefly working, like usually there are like some, probably depending on the company, right? But there are some tiers inside, right? And then probably it's either moving to leadership or some managerial position, right? So how do you even start a conversation with your leads or your managers, how to progress and about your career inside the company?
Okay. So I can't speak for every XDev, and I'm not going to sit here and beat the keywords drum, but from what I have noticed, what we have in our company, we have what we call a level up program, where you start as a tester, you move up the tester ranks, and every tester from when you're starting as, like, if you're fresh, new out of college coming in, everyone can see what their path is, where that tree can get them and where they can go. And they also, it's like almost like a video game. I think that's why they call it level up. They know the things that they have to do to be able to get there. So, you're a tester, you've worked there for 6 months, you've had good evaluations, good one-on-ones, etc. If you tick these boxes, we can get there. You can be, in a promotion line to go to tester level 2, 3, and 4. And essentially, those lines are revolved around experience, the different types of work that you've done, that you have, good feedback from all the people that you're working with in the projects that you are. Other lines start going into specializations. So certification, as I mentioned before, is a specialization that is always in demand. You always need those people who see things from a certification mindset, a functionality mindset. There's compatibility, either mobile or PC, which is another technical set where you need to, you got to love PCs, Macs, phones to be able to do that. Takes, again, specific knowledge, skill set. Recently, and this isn't just our company that's doing it. We're seeing this from Microsoft and Sony, etc. There's an accessibility track as well, which is very, very important, even more so now. That we have games that are built for everyone, not just for able bodies like myself, so that everyone can be able to play games because they're for everybody. And there's different types of accessibility testing that exist. It's not just controllers. It's color blindness, different biases and stuff that are in games that you don't know that are there. You need to have specialized people to be able to identify those. Outside of that, there's a leadership track going into seniors and leads. Now, this was something when I was back at my previous company. Everyone thought that it was straight up. You go from tester to senior to lead. Unfortunately, not all testers are meant to be management. I mean, that's one of the things that you have to realize right away. You have people who are amazingly great at their job, but if you give them 5 people underneath them, they're going to fail because they're not good managers, or they're not meant to be managers, or they haven't been given the tools to train to become managers. So we have to find a path for them through these specializations and expert testers and whatnot. There are some folks who just love, breaking games and being part of titles, and they don't care about leadership. If leadership is what you want or something that you're interested in, there's leadership paths, senior to lead tester, project manager, QA manager. And then, after that's directors running studios. But we find that, people who are testers and some people get into XDev QA. And Ariel and I spoke about this a bit last time. Some folks get into external development QA because it is an easy toe into the industry, where they may be blocked if they were to go work for a first-party company out of the gate. And I'm just going to throw out a name here because we're in Montreal. If I wanted to become a tester at Ubisoft tomorrow, and I walked up to the door and I said, "Hey, here's my resume. I have no QA experience, but man, I love video games. Can I be a tester?" Ubisoft's going to be like, "Probably not." And again, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not saying that's what they would do. I'm just saying most companies aren't going to hire someone with no experience. But then we get folks that come in. They work at companies like ours for 6 months, a year, 2 years, get about 10 or 15, 20 different titles under their belt, understand cert, compatibility, all the different facets, maybe even have built a test plan or two. I mean, these are all great experiences that they can have in XDev. And then when they go back to Ubisoft and say, "Hey, I'd like to become a tester on your next project. Here is 2 years of experience of work that I've done at this company. And these are the skills that I've developed to be able to go there." You're probably going to have a better shot, get a second interview, be able to move forward. So while we have a career path internally at our companies, and again, not just mine, I'm sure everyone does, some folks that come in to become testers are looking to get to the next level of the QA career track path.
It's very generous of you to assume that everyone has that. Because I know for a fact that, especially for some of the newer XDev companies that are kind of just starting, they probably don't have the same depth of career progression that other companies do, especially if they're smaller. They might literally just have a couple pools,
right?
And, a dream basically. But on that front, actually, I am curious to know what would you tell a tester who was looking for an XDev company to apply to? Let's say they had their pick of the litter. They could work at any XDev company they wanted to. How would you, if you were in their shoes, how would you try and decide between which company to work for? What would you look for as a person being interviewed and applying to those kinds of companies?
That's a really great question. If I'm a brand new tester and I'm serious about QA and I'm serious about getting my foot in the games industry, I would look for companies that have been here a while, that have breadth of experience. And what I mean by breadth of experience, I mean the different types of projects that they've had, that they've worked on, that they have a solid base of employment, in the regions that they're located in. If I was looking, I would prefer to work for a company that has just a larger foundation, a larger footprint, so that there's more avenues available to me than someone who's only working on maybe one product or two products that you're aware of. That if just from a risk point of view, if those projects go belly up, then you may not have work the next day. I was very lucky years ago working at VMC. We were, the studio in Montreal was a startup, but we had a really good relationships with partners and developers that when one project was coming off, we had another project coming right on. So, I'm very thankful myself that I was able to move from project to project to project for the course of my tenure there. And you would hope that any larger group that you're working with, you're going to have that same type of experience. So you want to make sure that you have the highest possible chance of having, quote unquote, and I'm going to say this, with all the caveats in the world, guaranteed employment. I mean, nothing is guaranteed in this industry or it just in the world, period. But you want to give yourself the best possible chance for guaranteed employment in the field that you want to be able to work in, and picking the right one that's the right size is a good start. A lot of testers care about the ability to be able to work from home or, work in studio. It's still a thing. COVID's over, but we still hear about it. So there are certain studios that have the ability to be able to do work from home. And if that's a thing, when you're talking to your recruiter or when you're talking in your interview, make sure you're asking those questions, because the last thing that you want is to get to the next step and, oh, well, actually, we don't do work from home. You have to be at the studio. We expect you at 9:00 on Monday. And that wasn't your expectation because they had heard something else otherwise. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Make sure you're doing your research, but also, don't be afraid to talk to the people that you're talking to about when you're wanting to get that job. The internet's your friend. You can look up any XDev company. There's probably a lot of reviews out there for a lot of them. But you also, it's like reading TripAdvisor. You're going to have 5s. You're going to have 1s. The 5s are probably there because they clicked 5. The 1 is because they were angry about something. The answer is probably somewhere close to the middle. And you just need to make sure you're taking all that feedback when you're selecting an XDev company to work for.
On that front, we actually have someone in the Underground QA Discord who started putting together like a doc kind of talking about their experiences with different companies, and they were hoping to get some other folks to contribute to it. So that's just a quick plug out there for anyone interested. We have a Discord where lots of people are talking about all sorts of things related to testing in the games industry, and some folks are even talking about their experiences with different companies and what that's been like.
There's a curveball from the chat from Joe, speaking of community, our community resident Joe. If you don't have a choice where to work and you're just destined to work at a company that doesn't have like a nice career progression path, what would be your advice for those people that are just forced to work for those companies?
Yeah, okay. And that kind of touches into our next topic actually, which is like getting too comfortable and how to avoid it. Like I would think that if I had my like pretty limited options to start, I would start there. Like if those are my options, right? Like work at the companies that are available, get the experience that you need, and then start looking to move on as soon as you're able to. So like, what about y'all? Like, how do you avoid getting too comfortable at a company that maybe doesn't actually have a long-term future for you?
So that's a great question. I guess the best possible answer is it's kind of up to the person that's looking into the mirror. They need to be able to realize when they're getting comfortable, and they get to realize like what their goals are and what they want to do. Change is scary. So if you're really comfortable at XDev or whatever job that you're doing, and you want to be able to move on to something else, you need to make sure that you realize that and understand that, and then start thinking about, okay, well, what do I need to do to be able to move on? With XDev, you build up a lot of experience, and you can always leverage that experience when you go to either another XDev company, because maybe Coke wasn't your flavor. Maybe you want to try Pepsi, or maybe you want to see what it's like on the other side of the wall. You need to make those decisions and what the differences are between one or the other. and know that if you're working to go into actual development or work for a publisher, working at internal QA at a publisher side, just make sure that you understand what you're stepping into and how it's different. One of the key things that I often hear is, while moving from XDev to working for first party is an amazing experience, because there's a pre-built culture around you. Usually there's a pre-built culture on the title that you're working on, or the IP, or oh my god, I'm working for this company that's in this 15-story office tower and it's amazing, and my logo is everywhere, everybody knows the company that I work for. Sometimes it's, well, I'm only working on this for the next 2 years. That variety is gone. So XDev is a little bit different, and the expectations for what a tester is on XDev versus something like that, you need to know. If I'm working on Rainbow 6.15 for the next 2 years, I'm going to get bored there, and maybe this is what I want. And what are the different packages and stuff that are available? Obviously, salary and things like that. So,
I mean, I'll throw in my own bit of advice here for anyone in this position where you're kind of wondering, how do I avoid getting stuck? I'll tell you what I tell everyone. You should always be applying for jobs. Always. I don't care if you're happy. I don't care if you love your job. I don't care if you think it's the most stable job you could possibly have. Game industry has shown us that is not the case. So it behooves you to always be applying to other jobs, always be taking a look at what else is out there, and then doing that that analysis of all right, these are the options I have on the table. I have this really awesome opportunity that I'm currently working with this company. They pay me X and it's great, but this other company, they're offering me a different set of benefits or a different pay range, or they're offering me more opportunity to continue my growth, because while my pay is great at this company, maybe this other company actually has upward mobility, right? And so that is where your opportunity to actually continue your growth will be. You're only going to be able to make those comparisons if you have anything to compare, and the only way you're going to have anything to compare is if you are actively applying to other companies all the time. I cannot stress this enough. And sometimes you'll get offers that you'll turn down because they're not good enough, and that will give you a reason to appreciate the place that you're currently working at. So yeah, ABA, always be applying.
And interviewing is a skill, so I'm gonna always put that shameful story of mine when I was Pride Golf before the fall. I was so proud of myself that I can just go to a big corporation and nail an interview. I didn't, because I got rusty with the interviewing process. So aside from all the research and all the awesome stuff that I said, interviewing is a skill, and you can get rusty, and don't risk a chance of applying for a dream job and a dream company and then flopping an interview just because you got rusty with your skills.
That's a good point. It really is, and it's a soft skill that you always need to hone. So you're right.
Another benefit of looking for where you want to apply for stuff is you can find those holes in your resume. It's like, I really wish I could have this bullet point here or there, and that can help you identify, all right, here's what I can be doing today to make my resume better for the jobs I want to apply to. So if you're looking for what can I do now if my company doesn't have a progression path, you can be using that application process to identify what you want to learn, grow, and be able to demonstrate in those interviews.
Yeah, and I was going to say that I think another, aside from just always applying, let's say you only applied when you felt like your situation at your company is no longer good for you. How do you recognize that that's the case, right? I think there's a few ways. One would be if your growth has become stagnant, right? You're not learning new skills. You're not getting new accomplishments to put on your resume. Everything that you're doing is kind of the same as the stuff that you've already done. If you're not feeling challenged anymore, then that might be a sign that you're actually no longer growing, in which case you have probably either maxed out the opportunities at your current company, or you need to find out from your manager what you need to do in order to get new challenges. Because maybe they're not challenging you because they don't know that you want to be challenged or that you're looking to move up. I think that some companies are kind of content to leave people where they are until they demonstrate that they're ambitious and looking for opportunities to continue their growth. But if you're finding that you're not challenged anymore, then that might be a sign that you're not growing, and it is time to like look at what else is out there. So let's say we have an XDev tester. They are looking to move on. They have some experience at a couple, maybe one or two XDev companies. How do they translate that experience into a good resume that will get them in the door of an interview?
So, from my side of things, first of all, let's talk about NDAs. I think NDAs are an important thing to talk about here. So, working at an XDev, the company has an NDA with the clients and the directors that we're working with, either a production, publisher, whatever. So, I worked on X project, but my NDA with the XDev company as well as with the publisher developer means I can't tell anyone that I worked on it. Man, that sucks. Because if I felt that I had a pivotal role where I learned a lot about a thing and I can't put it on my resume that I did that thing, then essentially I'm just telling this client that, hey, I worked for XDev company for 2 years. What does that really tell them? Well, when you're building a resume, you need to call out, the things that you did on that product. I mean, because the thing that you did are the things that people are going to ask about. At any interview, no one's going to say, well, how did you do on, let's say Valorant 15 or, Call of Duty X or whatever. They're not going to say, hey, tell me about your experience in that project. They're going to ask you questions like, can you give me an example of an experience that you had where you had to do X, Y, and Z? They care more about the experiences. So you need to be able to highlight those experiences and things that you've done on the projects that you've worked on so that it facilitates a good conversation with your hiring manager. One of the things that I would recommend that no one do is put the titles that you worked on in XDev on your resume if you're not in the credits. Because if you do that, then while you may not get, talked about the first time, but this is a very small industry. Everybody knows everybody. And if you go to a hiring manager and you worked for, 123 company and you say that I worked on this thing, then it's going to create it could potentially create a back channel where they start calling in your references, asking about it. And the very first thing that hiring manager is going to say is, we know that company doesn't allow credits or doesn't allow whatever, and you're breaking NDA just by giving me this resume. Unfortunately, we can't hire you no matter how good you are. I've heard that feedback before from hiring managers. It's horrible, but I get it. So if you're not in the credits on a game, I would not put it in your resume. But I would always talk about the experiences and the awesome things that you did to help sell yourself in your resume. There are a myriad of ways to be able to describe the type of project that you worked on, or it's a AAA asymmetrical FPS RPG, just whatever. You can throw those things in and say, I worked on a title in this genre, and these are the types of things that I did. But I can never say that I worked on Baldur's Gate 12, and I was, in fact, I built the test plan for, whoever the hero is or whatever. You say that, you're going to get yourself into lots of trouble. So credits is always tricky. If you're ever worried about it, I've never met a project manager or test manager who isn't willing to talk to their testers who are applying for jobs outside of XDev to talk to them about what they can and cannot say in their resume. Always ask questions. If you have a project manager or a test manager who's going to give you grief about applying for a job, you shouldn't be working there anyway. So you should be having those relationships. You should be having people in the industry who can help you out, give you advice on, how you build your resumes. I think actually, silent plug for this organization, there's quite a few conversations and topics about building your resume. I think it's definitely a good place to look as well. But NDAs are important. Make sure you don't break them. Very small industry. If someone calls you out, it's going to be very hard to get that stigma off of you.
And I'll say that as a hiring manager, I have never been particularly interested or moved in making a decision one way or the other based on the titles that a person I'm hiring has worked on before, unless it is like in almost exactly the same genre. Like if I'm, making a like a real-time strategy game and you're like, oh, I tested StarCraft 2, then I'd be like, okay, well that's actually super relevant to what we're doing. But I don't care that it's StarCraft 2. What I care is that it was a real-time strategy game, right? So like I think that, like, to your point, not only is it may be risky in some cases for XDev folks to violate their NDA, but also it's unnecessary if you can
Yeah.
speak to the more abstract skill sets that you developed. Like if you built test plans for testing units or factions or resource collection or things like that, that's going to speak to me a lot more than the fact that you worked on this like big like name game, right? So I think that even saying StarCraft 2 might be a nice shorthand for I worked on a real-time strategy game, but it's not the part that I actually care about. I don't care about the name. I care about what you're talking about, the experience, the abstract skill set, what you actually did and accomplished there. That's the interesting part. So making sure that that's represented in your resume in terms of what kinds of tasks you were doing, what kinds of accomplishments you had while you were working on that project, that's way more interesting to me as a hiring manager.
Well said.
And I will just, as a tale of caution, because some people will be like, Adam, what are you talking about? Industry is big, companies are big. Who would notice that I'm, putting a title or inflating my title or my contributions? And I've heard so many stories, and in previous companies I've worked, in the current company I work, when there were people that we found out, or somebody found out, they were either overinflating their titles or overinflating their contributions and got fired because of that, or get their interviewing process canceled right away. So you think it's a big industry, but it isn't. Those are real stories that happen. So please don't do that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
You'd be surprised like how many times you're gonna have a coworker who you used to work with, who worked with you while you had that job, while you were working on that project, and they might be a part of your hiring team. They might actually get to look at your resume and then turn around and say, "Hey, everyone, this is not what they did there. I was there with them. Trust me." It does happen, and so it's worth remembering that it is a smaller industry than you think it is. It's worth being honest. It's worth playing it safe. I think on the NDA front, especially, like definitely don't want to like accidentally put a name for a game that's not even announced yet, maybe in your resume, because you weren't thinking that it would be there, or it wouldn't be out by the time you started applying or something. But things like that happen. So it's important to be careful.
And if you're not scared, usually if you tend to lie or you still want to go that route. Now knowing Adam, if I will have someone from Keywords applying to my company, the usually questions that get asked, do we know someone that worked on that project in Keywords that we can talk to, so we can ask about that guy? That's usually, and 9 out of 10, we know a person that works at a XDev company that we can reach out to and ask questions. So you won't get away.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think that we as an industry, and I'm going to even push this down a little bit more towards XDev, like we are very strict on our NDAs. And we tell every staff member that we have that you obviously can't talk about the project that you worked on because, legal reasons, etc. But there's this thought that happens sometimes where testers are like, oh, well, the game's released, so I can talk about it because of reasons, right? I mean, it's out there. Nobody cares, blah, blah, blah. That really isn't the case. The only time where and I'm only going to use my company as an example. I'm sure most XDev companies do this, but the moment that you put in the credits and the game is released, that it's kind of over because you're in the game and you can point to it. You can take a screenshot. You can say, hey, I did the thing. Here I am. It's awesome. And that's perfectly valid. And what I would love is if more publishers and developers would list in the credits the testers that worked at XDev on them, because there still is quite a bit of a break there. There's some publishers who have reasons. We definitely don't want to get into that, but there are definitely reasons why external development doesn't get added into the credits in their game for whatever reason. And it is a bummer, talking as a tester who worked on quite a few titles, that you didn't get credited in, and you were very passionate and happy and proud of the work that you did, but you quote unquote can't tell anyone that you worked on this thing, because there actually is no proof that you worked on it other than the fact that you know it. And we need to ensure that our testers are aware of that, so that they don't get themselves in trouble out of ignorance. Sometimes they may not put it on their resume because it's the piece of paper, but they'll go on LinkedIn or go on some other site and say that, I was part of the character creation team for X, and I did some of the gunplay physics QA for Y, or blah blah blah. And they don't realize that just because they wrote that up there 2 years ago, it's still there, and now they'll end up getting in trouble for it. So, it's one of those fun conversations in our industry that I think needs to get escalated and pushed up a little bit more, because work is work, development work is development work, and everyone should be credited appropriately.
And I'll say that I think that there are probably plenty of development companies out there that just don't realize why credits are important to XDev testers, and that it matters for situations exactly like this. So when you are trying to communicate, like this is a tip for project managers and leads, I think, more than anything else. But when you're trying to communicate to your client that you want the team to be on the credits, I think it's worth saying why. Because if you don't put us in the credits, then none of these folks are allowed to say that they worked on this game. But if you do put them in the credits, then they can say that. They can put it in their resumes, and it can help them in their careers. So it actually does matter, because I think that they might be kind of like me, which is like I didn't realize why it mattered until a few years ago when this was like explained to me. So it's worth giving the reasons why you want to get them on the credits. There was actually something I wanted to mention that's related to this, but there was an interview done with BB King a while back where he was giving advice to early musicians. And one of the things that he said is that it is really important when you're first starting out as a musician to learn to play a lot of different kinds of music so you can get a wider variety of jobs, right? If you start off your music career saying, I'm a blues musician, I only ever play blues, well, then you're probably not going to get enough jobs to actually put food on the table. You need to be more open and diverse than that, right? You need to be able to take that job playing that wedding or playing, at a prom or something like that, where you're not going to play only blues music. You're going to play whatever they need you to play that night, right? But having that kind of diverse skill set where you can play a wide variety of jobs or play a wide variety of music will help you get a wide variety of jobs, and then eventually you can specialize. I think that is directly related to why it's important to showcase a wide variety of skills in your resume, because you want to be able to demonstrate that you're capable of filling in all kinds of roles. Yeah, I can do certification, compatibility. I can jump on a functional team. I can write test cases if you need me to be write test cases, whatever you need. I can do it. I can do all of those things, because that way, when a hiring manager is looking at your resume, they're able to see all of the different possibilities that you have, and they might see the specific combination of things that they're looking for. I'm looking for someone who can write test cases, has been a certification tester, and we also need someone who speaks Mandarin because we're trying to ship this game in China. And then, oh my God, there's one person who has all three of those, and they happen to be if they hadn't had that diverse set of skills on their resume, then they never would have even realized that the perfect candidate had actually applied. So all this is to say, make sure that you are expressing all of your varied experiences as much as possible, your varied experiences, your varied skill sets. Try to show that you are a person with a diverse set of capabilities. So that way, hiring managers look at you and they see all kinds of places they can potentially put you instead of, only the one thing that you're really, really good at. Any other? Does anyone have any other advice here for career progression for XDev testers, or should we jump over to talking about leads?
I have a just question on because as I understand, and please Adam correct me if I'm wrong, but it's getting more popular for because I know that Keywords has not only QA services but other development services, right?
Yeah.
And it's getting more popular. I know Kulak has that. They started with porting, so more and more companies are switching not only from being just pure QA. Do you have a track? As a spicy question, do you have a track for your testers to jump from QA to developers, like other developers?
Yeah, spicy questions, Marcin. Well, okay. So the answer is yes and no. Okay, and I'll do my best to try to describe that. The vast majority of the work that we do is on what I would consider a black box publisher QA side. We do have a certain percentage of our company that works directly with the developers and does dev QA. In my opinion, dev QA is actually two things. Dev QA is testers who are working next to devs who are ensuring that the product is being released and the builds are being done in association with what the devs are wanting to do, who are working directly with them. Sometimes it's smoke checks, sometimes that's feature requests, things like that. The other version of dev QA is what I would consider the classic Microsoft version of an SDET, software developer and test, where they will not only do QA, but they'll also write some version of code and things of that sort. So there's kind of two or three different paths there, etc. We have had many members of our testing force who have pivoted internally at Keywords to work for some of these co-dev partners. Again, I'm going to speak from experience that we have here. We have like 40 something devs under the Keywords umbrella. In Montreal, we have a couple that are really close. Snowden Studios is right down the road in Ottawa. And they do a lot of porting, they do a lot of feature development, and they work with a lot of AAA publishers on other titles where they'll come in and build a feature. We've had some staff from our Montreal studio who possessed the acumen to be able to kind of move up into that space, who went to school for development and QA was their start, but they want to get to that next level. And we've had them work with like a company like Snowden, etc., to be able to develop that next level of QA acumen directly with devs. So that is available. If we see testers that have that type of skill set, we can often pair them with one of our development studios around the world. We've done this a couple of times where our internal studio, we can obviously VPN to wherever the hell they are, and we can have them work with them. So the answer is yes. It isn't like the direct skill tree to get to where you want to get to, but we start to notice when some of our testers have a bit more of a specialized skill set, and then we'll reach out to our developers and say, hey, do you need QA, or do you need someone who has a higher level of QA expertise? We have them in our studio. You may not have to hire them in your studio, and we can have them work directly with you, and then they can work directly with that dev group. And that can be like local, like in Ottawa, or worldwide, Seattle, London, anywhere around the world.
So I know that's still the question, but also like a small little advice on the career, because I went from external to then internal QA. Right now the industry is in a place where just working on like game companies don't suck up people from the streets. Now it's the opposite, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be a time again when it's gonna the industry will boom and it's gonna be the bubble will be growing and it's gonna be hiring left and right. Usually you have that cycle with big companies where when they start on working on a title, it's very small and they don't, but once it's getting slow, closer and closer to the release, they will be starving for hands to work on, and they will get desperate, and they will just hire anyone they can just hands on just to push the product, because at some point Keywords has limited amount of people we can hire from, so we can we cannot ask for 1,000 people, because then either keywords won't have enough people, or the accountants will kill us for asking for such. So we will prefer just to get anyone from the street. So my small advice is to be mindful of how you progress your career and find your niches inside in the industry. I wanted to become a 3D animator in the industry, but at the time when I was starting, there was basically so many 3D animators and so many artists, it would take a lot of time and effort to even go that path. And just I've noticed that it's much easier to progress as a QA. And then I found my little niches, and thanks to that, I have a very successful career, I think. So find your niches and don't get attached too much to your dream. Maybe do a side quest and follow other path, because then there's so many examples in industry when people came back around and then join again, either as a art producer, or just switch. We had those examples when there was like a person like was 40 or even 50, and they just switched professions back to, obviously they had a little problem of starting from junior, but still the company was really nice and welcomed them and stayed the salary that they had as a senior person. They just said, we're gonna make you that junior artist, but your salary is frozen until you catch up with your title to your salary again. But he jumped from being a senior QA to being a junior artist, and that's how he progressed again. So be patient and find your niches, and don't expect people just to hire you because game dev is popular.
I like that. Be open to side quests. It's a good way to go about it.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our final topic. We're going to talk about some advice for the XDev lead. And let's actually start with, since we were just talking about career growth, how can an XDev lead foster growth for the testers that are leading, while still making sure that they're like meeting the needs of the client?
So, as I mentioned before, not every tester is meant to be a lead, meant to be in management. So we want to make sure that the leads that we have the team mindset in mind. Anything that you're doing, working on any title, they're focusing on the growth of their testers. We have processes and stuff in place where that's supposed to happen, but you want someone there who really cares about their staff and growing their staff and ensuring that they're going to become the best tester they possibly can. Sometimes, what's the best way to describe this? Sometimes developers and publishers will talk about a project and they want something done, and they essentially just kind of throw it over the fence to the testers and say, okay, this is your thing. This is the thing that you're working on. We're going to give it to you, and we want you to own it. This small thing. And a lead needs to be able to talk to their testers and begin to understand kind of what this means. If you're not just doing test plans and, test strategies and, doing the checklists in Zephyr or Jira or whatever, a test lead needs to be able to say, okay, this is a good opportunity for us. We're gonna own this item. This is going to be our thing. So let's go back to the devs with our ideas and thoughts about how we would test this, how we would go about this, because normally we just get direction from them. Now they're just throwing it over the fence, and we're gonna catch it and we're gonna own it. So leads need to be able to work with testers and to grow them and ensure that they're doing the things that they need to do. Also, there's some team management involved, where it's not like what testers you want to put on that project. Sometimes there isn't a lot of, oh, well, this is the team that I have because this is what was scheduled, because this is what was available, and you got to be able to make the most of it. And you got to be able to challenge those testers. So giving them, I guess I'm going to use your term, side quests, giving them things that they can work on. And also the test leads can also help grow their staff by not taking on everything themselves, but also like, okay, well, if we need to get a test plan built around this thing, go to the senior tester or a tester who's really good and say, hey, can you begin building what you feel is a good test plan for this feature, and start to give them jobs outside of just doing the QA, just kind of see how they take it, see how they focus on working on that thing, what their mind space is, and you can kind of get an idea of how well that tester is going to be, later on in a senior leadership or a management role. There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different ways to foster growth in the QA side. I'm obviously not going to be able to speak to all of them, but I love giving people little jobs and seeing how well they can do them. It's like there's an old interview question that we used to use back in the day, and this is extremely dated, and I apologize. But we would ask people, how do you QA a soft drink machine in Alaska? And they take that question and they're like, the hell are you asking me? And I'm like, well, how would you do this thing? And they're like, and then they start to think about it. There is no right answer, but it's all about the process of how that tester accepts the premise, knowing nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, do you have electricity? Is it cold outside? If it is, how cold does it get? How many cans of Coke are going to be in the machine? What is the capacity? Like, you have to start thinking about all of these things and making a lot of assumptions, and you start to see the headspace around that tester start to, okay, it's not as simple as what I thought it was, and it's not as stupid as I thought it was. Let's work on it. And if you can get a tester to start thinking that way, you've kind of won, because then it translates to everything. How do you test this thing? Well, now I have to break down all those assumptions and be able to do it again. That's how one of the reasons that I think when you have a test lead, if you can ask those types of questions and you have a test team that can do it, then they're going to grow in the QA space that way.
Yeah.
There was another example too. I can't remember. I want to say, how do you QA a pencil? How do you QA a pen? Yeah. Something like that. That's another one.
That's actually comes from an old sales interview question, which is like, sell me this pen, right?
Right.
And then the test version of it became, how would you test this pen?
Right.
And I like the hypothetical better instead of using the concrete thing, because then you see whether or not they ask questions about it. Because if they see the pen, then they're like, oh, well, I see the pen right in front of me. I know how to test it. But if you say, well, how would you test a pen? Then they're going to be like, well, what kind of pen are you talking about? Are you talking about a ballpoint pen, or is it actually a mechanical pencil or something? Having it be hypothetical, I think, helps that question from a QA perspective in a way that it doesn't help the sales question, because then they have to start to ask, interrogate assumptions. And you will get examples of people who just dive right in and start building a test plan. And you're like, well, I never told you what kind of pen it was. It's actually like the pen on a printer, or something like that. There's all sorts of ways that you can show that you made too many assumptions by just diving right in instead of asking what pen I was even talking about. But I liked what you were saying about giving them tasks that are maybe more traditionally put on the lead, but you give it to them in a way that you have an opportunity to kind of double check their work to make sure that it was done appropriately. Mm-hmm. The question I have there, though, is that how do you navigate how much time you have to spend on actually doing the things that your client wants you to do versus spending time on career development? Because let's take the test plan example, right? Maybe it takes you an hour to put together a test plan, but it takes a tester 8 hours because they've never done it before. They have to look up a bunch of different ways to do it. They second guess themselves and have to triple check their work. First time they do it, it takes them a bunch of extra time, right? But that's time that you're billing your client for the work that they're doing, right? So how do you balance that? Well, we want to do some amount of career development and career growth of our folks, but also we're being paid by our client to do specific things, and that maybe isn't one of those things that they would tell us to do.
Yep. So there's a couple of, first of all, it's a really great question. A version of what you're saying comes up quite a lot. And I think the best answer that I could possibly give is transparency overall. So if and I would go back to an example that when I was a tester, I was asked to do these things, and version of what you're asking comes up, and oftentimes you have publishers and clients that you can work with that understand what's kind of going on. We're trying to build a better mousetrap, and doing that is with the staff that you currently have. So, for example, if they have a senior tester that they want to give this thing to help level them up outside of them just being a tester, then first of all, we got to make sure that we have enough time in the day to get all the test plans done. And the test lead or project manager needs to have an open conversation with the partners that they're working with to say, hey, I'm going to give this task to this person as a bit of a level up. We're going to plan this during the exploratory or ad hoc testing phases on a build that that we're working on that's like towards the end of the week, when it's probably the least repercussions on the title. Outside of that, and we've definitely done this internally at our company, is where it's all internal billable to ourselves. So it's not going to the client. So if we're doing something in an exercise like that, we'll make sure that, that tester job for that specific feature is covered by, Sally, and we'll take Bob aside and we'll say, okay, Bob, I'm working on this thing. You're not going to be testing today. You're going to be working on this. It's all internal billable. We're paying them. The client isn't paying them. We want you to be able to work on this thing. And then that'll just be an exercise that they have to do. They have 4 or 5 hours to do what they can. And then they get put back on the project as a normal billable tester when everything's over with. The last thing you want to do is to do something in such a way where you're not being as communicative and open and transparent with the publisher, because I've definitely seen it where it's like, you sent this tester to this thing, but you billed me for these 4 hours, but they were doing something else which wasn't project related. Those can create some very weird situations. And as we were talking before with Marcin, everyone has a memory. So if one of those bad instances comes up, then that's the only thing that you think about. It's the negative. It's the thing that, scratches at your brain. So we want to do everything we can to not have those types of things come up. I very rarely work with publishers and developers who don't care about the growth of the staff that are working on their project. And often cases, this is not an issue, but I would be negligent in saying that there are sometimes publishers and developers we work for who are very strict about the usage of their time. It's all kind of part and parcel to the box that you're talking about. You need to be able to understand what the expectations are, what you can do, what you can't do. And sometimes, sometimes internally, that type of training is something that we have to eat because it makes sense for the growth of our staff. This is a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. I think that, like, if I was a client and I was like talking to an XDev team, that is actually one of the questions I ask is like, what does your training program look like? When do they do that training, and who's paying for it? Because I actually do, like you said, I want my XDev testers to be like continuing to grow. I don't want them to be stagnant. In part because I don't think they'll be motivated if they're stagnant. So it is actually important to me that they're receiving ongoing training. But also at the same time, like, if I have a deadline and I need them to test all 8 hours today because we're coming up against our deadline, then like I'm going to be upset if I hear like, oh, well, we took half a day to do some kind of training exercise that we neglected to tell you about, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen very often in my experience. Like, but I do appreciate that your message here is make sure you're actively talking to your client about those kinds of things, because you want to set expectations. Yeah. And also you need to make time for that. It's important. You have to do it, and they will know and understand that as long as you talk to them about it.
It's the assumptions that we make, right? We assume that every developer, publisher that we're working with has done this a million times before, when in fact we may be working with someone who's never done anything in an external development before. So having those conversations and transparency also helps them level up, because they're going to be like, oh, I didn't realize this was a thing. Of course, do this thing. Or, hey, let me go talk about it and get back to you about what our company's policy is on XYZ. Helps on both sides.
On that front, actually, I think this will probably be our last subtopic for the day before we wrap up. How do you how do leads communicate effectively with their clients? Like what exactly, like, what would you train a new test lead on? Like, here's how you make sure that you have a really good like open line of communication with your client?
Well, the first thing I would say is that leads should only talk to their clients on EOD reports. That's the first thing. It's the only communication.
Good one.
So I hope everyone that heard that understands that was definitely a joke by the laughter. Leads should always be communicating with their staff, whether it's on Slack, whether it's on project one-on-ones, ideation sessions, getting involved in internal discussions. I mean, always ask. We want our leads to ask to find out where the level is of, like, can I get involved in your sprint management meetings? Can I get involved in this? Can I get involved in that? An EOD report is an absolutely essential thing that needs to go out. In my opinion, an EOD report is a cover your ass mechanic. It's meant to be able to say, hey, on Monday, we did X, and on X, we tested Y, and this was the percentage of this test plan. It's the most boring email you're ever going to write, but it's there
every time, too. 100%.
Yeah. It's made to just be able to say that, hey, on Monday, we did this thing. If that is your only point of communication with your clients, I have a lot of questions. That should never be the case. It should be the least important email that you write, but it should also, we've got to make sure that everything that is pertinent and accurate and correct, it should be in there. There are some clients that we work for who have very scheduled meetings for very scheduled conversations, and those are the only things they want to talk about. And we should always try to push to get a little bit more, but we got to make sure we're hitting those bars. But there are some clients and publishers we work with who are just, they want as much comms as possible. They'll set up daily meetings, weekly meetings. We want to make sure our leads get in there. As a training opportunity, any meetings we have like that, we should be bringing in like a senior tester or maybe a tester that is starting to move up down that path, just to listen in and be there as proxy, just to kind of see what goes on, how these communications happen, so that whenever they take the reins one day, they'll see what a successful meeting looks like. I find that reports are obviously important, like the EOD or just the reports for the daily work. But I find that the most business that really gets done, the most positives happen on those one-on-one conversations, talking about the product, talking about what's going on, getting a feel of what their needs are. When you can build that one-on-one relationship with whoever the PM and whoever the project lead is, I think you're golden. If you have a really good relationship there, they'll be much more open about the things that they're doing on both sides. And at the end of the day, whenever they come back with their next project, usually we say, hey, can I work with Bob? Because Bob was great on the last project that we worked with, because his communication skills were amazing. And then that just becomes a pain for us, because maybe we were going to put Bob on something else, but now we can't because you asked for him. So bit of a pain, bit of a problem, but also good feedback, because it lets us know that our teams are communicating properly and they're setting good expectations for what a good communication plan is. I hope that answered the question.
No, absolutely.
EODs forever. Let's do that.
EODs are make or break for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had some other stuff that I would have loved to get into today, but I think we're just running short on time. So let's go ahead and move to wrap up. So today we talked about XDev testing, and specifically we tried to give some useful advice to XDev testers on how they can be the most effective XDev tester and how they can continue to progress their career in QA. We also talked a little bit about some advice for the XDev lead and how to coordinate with clients. For our last bit of thing that we like to do, or our last thing that we like to do every podcast, is we will do a bug of the cast, and today's bug of the cast is from Adam. Adam, do you want to tell us about your bug?
Sure. So I'm going to go back in the Wayback Machine to about 2008, 2009, when I was a tester on the Sony QApp program way back in the day on VMC. For PS3 titles back in the day, there was a set of mastering checks that had to occur where we actually, believe it or not, used to burn things onto disk. And they were burnt onto Blu-ray disc. And there was a TRC that existed that said that you had to get to the initial interactive screen within 60 seconds of booting the game. It was a very core TRC. Most titles failed it the first time it came in. And one of the ways that developers got around that at the time was they used to put on a dummy file on the disk so that the laser would track that dummy file to get to a specific spot on the disk to begin loading so that it would meet that 60-second requirement. So we burnt an ISO to a disk, our test managers did, and they noticed that there was a video file there. Now, immediately we thought this might be like a trailer, might be an Easter egg or something like that. But when we actually booted up the Blu-ray disc in our mastering setup, we realized that dummy file was the initial episode of South Park, the TV show. So it was very interesting. Everybody got a laugh. And we're like, oh my God, that's pretty cool. That's very funny. And then we proceeded to do the QApp cert pass for this title. It worked. The title did boot up within the 60 seconds. It did. So it did pass that TRC. Unfortunately, it did fail for legal. So because so what they send us is basically the thing they're going to send us right before they send it to cert. So we had to write an email to our contacts and let them know that, hey, this file's there. And then I forget the classification they use for it, but it's immediately an MF across the board, and they failed it for legal. But it did pass that TRC, so it did work, just not the way they intended.
Beautiful.
Why that video? Why not literally?
Someone loves South Park. Someone either in their mastering department or in the someone's a big fan.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, that's lesson of the day, folks. Don't put copies of South Park episodes on your games that you're sending to certification. I want to thank Adam for joining us for the podcast today. We'd also like to thank our audience for listening. We wouldn't be doing this podcast without you. If you have any suggestions for future topics or bugs of the day, we would love to hear them. If you are a QA professional and would like to be on the podcast, we would love to have you. In either case, please contact us at undergroundgameqaconf@gmail.com. You can also reach out on X, formerly Twitter, at Underground QA, or on the Underground Game QA LinkedIn page. We'd love to hear from you and collaborate. We also have an open Discord server. You can find a link to that on all of our social media pages, and you can also search for it on open Discord servers at Discord. Before we go, does anyone have anything that they would like to plug?
No. Everybody play Space Marines 2. It's a great game. I'm a big fan. Everyone should play.
I'll plug that Balatro is on mobile now for anyone who wants to just absolutely nuke their productivity. You can do it from anywhere now.
That's dangerous.
It's so dangerous. I'm still mad that my manager introduced this to me because both me and my partner are obsessed, and so every time we're watching TV now, both of us have to fight the urge to also play Balatro while we're doing it. Also, I'd love to just, as always, plug our Discord. There's a ton of awesome channels in there. We have a library full of useful resources. We have a channel where you can post your resume and cover letters and get feedback from them. We have another channel for discussing the episodes that we do. We often seek out feedback from our community members about episode topics before we record them. So if you ever want to give us your take on various topics before we jump into recording, we can actually incorporate some of those comments into our notes for discussion. And then we also do a variety of events. We have a monthly Saturday coffee hour, essentially on the second Saturday of every month. We'll meet together and just do kind of social hangout. And sometimes we do discussion groups for upcoming episode topics and other stuff. So a lot of great stuff going on in the Discord. Highly recommend you join, especially if you're a QA professional in the game industry or if you're wanting to get into QA. That is definitely a great place to start. All right, I think that's it for us. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. And as always, please keep testing and keep washing your hands. Goodbye.
Cheers.
Yeah.